Chapter 3. A telegram had told me to come to a town 10 miles from the house, so I was saved the crawling train to the local station and traveled down by an express. As soon as we left London, the fog cleared off, and an autumn sun, though without heat in it, painted the landscape with golden browns and yellows. My spirits rose as I lay back in the luxurious motor and sped between the woods and hedges. Oddly enough, my anxiety of overnight had disappeared. It was due, no doubt, to that exaggeration of detail which reflection in loneliness brings. Francis and I had not been separated for over a year, and our letters from the towers told so little. It had seemed unnatural to be deprived of those intimate particulars of mood and feeling I was accustomed to. We had such confidence in one another, and our affection was so deep. Though she was but 5 years younger than myself, I regarded her as a child. My attitude was fatherly. In return, she certainly mothered me with a solicitude that never cloyed. I felt no desire to marry while she was alive. She painted in watercolors with a reasonable success and kept house for me. I wrote, reviewed books, and lectured on aesthetics. We were a humdrum couple of quasi-artists, well satisfied with life, and all I feared for her was that she might become a suffragette or be taken captive by one of these wild theories that caught her imagination sometimes, and that Mabel, for one, had fostered. As for myself, no doubt she deemed me a trifle solid or stolid. I forget which word she preferred, but on the whole there was just sufficient difference of opinion to make intercourse suggestive without monotony, and certainly without quarreling. Drawing in deep draughts of the stinging autumn air, I felt happy and exhilarated. It was like going for a holiday, with comfort at the end of the journey instead of bargaining for centimes. But my heart sank noticeably the moment the house came into view. The long drive, lined with hostile monkey trees and formal wellingtonias that were solemn and sedate, was mere extension of the miniature approach to 1,000 semi-detached suburban residences, and the appearance of the towers, as we turned the corner with the rush, suggested a commonplace climax to a story that had begun interestingly, almost thrillingly. A villa had escaped from the shadow of the Crystal Palace, thumped its way down by night, grown suddenly monstrous in a shower of rich rain, and settled itself insolently to stay. Ivy climbed about the opulent red brick walls, but climbed neatly and with disfiguring effect. Sham as on a prison, or, the simile made me smile, an orphan asylum. There was no hint of the comely roughness of untidy ivy on a ruin. Clipped, trained, and precise it was, as on a brand-new Protestant church. I swear there was not a bird's nest nor a single earwig in it anywhere. About the porch it was particularly thick, smothering a 17th-century lamp with a contrast that was quite horrible. Extensive glass houses spread away on the farther side of the house. The numerous towers to which the building owed its name seemed made to hold schoolbells, and the window-sills, thick with potted flowers, made me think of the desolate suburbs of Brighton or Bexhill. In a commanding position upon the crest of a hill, it overlooked miles of undulating, wooded country southwards to the downs, but behind it, to the north, thick banks of ilex, holly, and privet protected it from the cleaner and more stimulating winds. Hence, though highly placed, it was shut in. 3 years had passed since I last set eyes upon it, but the unsightly memory I had retained was justified by the reality. The place was deplorable. It is my habit to express my opinions audibly sometimes, when impressions are strong enough to warrant it. But now I only sighed, oh dear, as I extricated my legs from many rugs and went into the house. A tall parlour-maid, with the bearing of a grenadier, received me, and standing behind her was Mrs. Marsh, the housekeeper, whom I remembered because her untidy back hair had suggested to me that it had been burnt. I went at once to my room, my hostess already dressing for dinner, but Frances came in to see me just as I was struggling with my black tie that had got tangled like a bootlace. She fastened it for me in a neat, effective bow, and while I held my chin up for the operation, staring blankly at the ceiling, the impression came. I wondered, was it her touch that caused it, that something in her trembled? Shrinking, perhaps, is the truer word. Nothing in her face or manner betrayed it, nor in her pleasant, easy talk while she tidied my things and scolded my slovenly packing, as her habit was, questioning me about the servants at the flat. The blouses, though right, were crumpled, and my scolding was deserved. There was no impatience, even. Yet, somehow or other, the suggestion of a shrinking reserve and holding back reached my mind. She had been lonely, of course, but it was more than that. She was glad that I had come, yet, for some reason unstated, she could have wished that I had stayed away. We discussed the news that had accumulated during our brief separation, and in doing so, the impression, at best exceedingly slight, was forgotten. My chamber was large and beautifully furnished. The hall and dining room of our flat would have gone into it with a good remainder, yet it was not a place I could settle down in for work. It conveyed the idea of impermanence, making me feel transient, as in a hotel bedroom. This, of course, was the fact, but some rooms convey a settled, lasting hospitality even in a hotel. This one did not. And as I was accustomed to work in the room I slept in, at least when visiting, a slight frown must have crept between my eyes. "Mabel has fitted a workroom for you just out of the library," said the clairvoyant Frances. "No one will disturb you there, and you'll have 15,000 books, all catalogued within easy reach. There's a private staircase, too. You can breakfast in your room and slip down in your dressing gown if you want to." She laughed. My spirits took a turn upwards as absurdly as they had gone down. "And how are you?" I asked, giving her a belated kiss. "It's jolly to be together again. I did feel rather lost without you, I'll admit." "That's natural," she laughed. "I'm so glad." She looked well and had country color in her cheeks. She informed me that she was eating and sleeping well, going out for little walks with Mabel, painting bits of scenery again, and enjoying a complete change and rest. And yet, for all her brave description, the words somehow did not quite ring true. Those last words in particular did not ring true. There lay in her manner, just out of sight, I felt, this suggestion of the exact reverse, of unrest, shrinking, almost of anxiety. Certain small strings in her seemed over-tight. "Keyed up" was the slang expression that crossed my mind. I looked rather searchingly into her face as she was telling me this. "Only the evenings," she added, noticing my query, yet rather avoiding my eyes. "The evenings are, well, rather heavy sometimes, and I find it difficult to keep awake." "The strong air after London makes you drowsy," I suggested, "and you like to get early to bed." Frances turned and looked at me for a moment steadily. "On the contrary, Bill, I dislike going to bed, here, and Mabel goes so early." She said it lightly enough, fingering the disorder upon my dressing-table in such a stupid way that I saw her mind was working in another direction altogether. She looked up suddenly with a kind of nervousness from the brush and scissors. "Billy," she said abruptly, lowering her voice, "isn't it odd, but I hate sleeping alone here. I can't make it out quite. I've never felt such a thing before in my life. Do you think it's all nonsense?" And she laughed, with her lips, but not with her eyes. There was a note of defiance in her I failed to understand. "Nothing a nature like yours feels strongly is nonsense, Frances," I replied soothingly. But I, too, answered with my lips only, for another part of my mind was working elsewhere and among uncomfortable things. A touch of bewilderment passed over me. I was not certain how best to continue. If I laughed, she would tell me no more. Yet if I took her too seriously, the strings would tighten further. Instinctively then, this flashed rapidly across me, that something of what she felt, I had also felt, though interpreting it differently. Vague it was, as the coming of rain or storm that announced themselves hours in advance with their hint of faint, unsettling excitement in the air. I had been but a short hour in the house, big, comfortable, luxurious house, but had experienced this sense of being unsettled, unfixed, fluctuating, a kind of impermanence that transient lodgers in hotels must feel, but that a guest in a friend's home ought not to feel, be the visit short or long. To Frances, an impressionable woman, the feeling had come in the terms of alarm. She disliked sleeping alone, while yet she longed to sleep. The precise idea in my mind evaded capture, merely brushing through me 3/4 out of sight. I realized only that we both felt the same thing, and that neither of us could get at it clearly. Degrees of unrest we felt, but the actual thing did not disclose itself. It did not happen. I felt strangely at sea for a moment. Frances would interpret hesitation as endorsement, and encouragement might be the last thing that could help her. Sleeping in a strange house, I answered at length, is often difficult at first, and one feels lonely. After 15 months in our tiny flat, one feels lost and uncared for in a big house. It's an uncomfortable feeling, I know it well, and this is a barrack, isn't it? The masses of furniture only make it worse. One feels in storage somewhere underground. The furniture doesn't furnish. One must never yield to fancies, though. Frances looked away towards the windows. She seemed disappointed a little. After our thickly populated Chelsea, I went on quickly, it seems isolated here. But she did not turn back, and clearly I was saying the wrong thing. A wave of pity rushed suddenly over me. Was she really frightened, perhaps? She was imaginative, I knew, but never moody. Common sense was strong in her, though she had her times of hypersensitiveness. I caught the echo of some unreasoning big alarm in her. She stood there, gazing across my balcony towards the sea of wooded country that spread dim and vague in the obscurity of the dusk. The deepening shadows entered the room, I fancied, from the grounds below. Following her abstracted gaze a moment, I experienced a curious, sharp desire to leave, to escape. Out yonder was wind and space and freedom. This enormous building was oppressive, silent, still. Great catacombs occurred to me, things beneath the ground, imprisonment and capture. I believe I even shuddered a little. I touched her shoulder. She turned round slowly, and we looked with a certain deliberation into each other's eyes. "Fanny," I asked, more gravely than I intended, "you are not frightened, are you? Nothing has happened, has it?" She replied with emphasis, "Of course not. How could it? I mean, why should I?" She stammered, as though the wrong sentence flustered her a second. "It's simply that I have this dislike of sleeping alone." Naturally, my first thought was how easy it would be to cut our visit short. But I did not say this. Had it been a true solution, Frances would have said it for me long ago. "Wouldn't Mabel double up with you," I said instead, "or give you an adjoining room, so that you could leave the door between you open? There's space enough, heaven knows." And then, as the gong sounded in the hall below for dinner, she said, as with an effort, this thing. "Mabel did ask me on the 3rd night, after I had told her, but I declined." "You'd rather be alone than with her?" I asked, with a certain relief. Her reply was so gravely given, a child would have known there was more behind it. Not that, but that she did not really want it. I had a moment's intuition and acted on it impulsively. She feels it too, perhaps, but wishes to face it by herself and get over it. My sister bowed her head, and the gesture made me realize of a sudden how grave and solemn our talk had grown, as though some portentous thing were under discussion. It had come of itself, indefinite as a gradual change of temperature. Yet neither of us knew its nature, for apparently neither of us could state it plainly. Nothing happened, even in our words. "That was my impression," she said, "that if she yields to it, she encourages it, and a habit forms so easily. Just think," she added with a faint smile that was the first sign of lightness she had yet betrayed, "what a nuisance it would be, everywhere, if everybody was afraid of being alone like that." I snatched readily at the chance. We laughed a little, though it was a quiet kind of laughter that seemed wrong. I took her arm and led her towards the door. "Disastrous, in fact," I agreed. She raised her voice to its normal pitch again, as I had done. "No doubt it will pass," she said, "now that you have come. Of course it's chiefly my imagination." Her tone was lighter, though nothing could convince me that the matter itself was light, just then. "And in any case," tightening her grip on my arm as we passed into the bright, enormous corridor and caught sight of Mrs. Franklin waiting in the cheerless hall below, "I'm very glad you're here, Bill, and Mabel, I know, is too. If it doesn't pass," I just had time to whisper with a feeble attempt at jollity, "I'll come at night and snore outside your door. After that, you'll be so glad to get rid of me that you won't mind being alone." "That's a bargain," said Frances. I shook my hostess by the hand, made a banal remark about the long interval since last we met, and walked behind them into the great dining room, dimly lit by candles, wondering in my heart how long my sister and I should stay, and why in the world we had ever left our cozy little flat to enter this desolation of riches and false luxury at all. The unsightly picture of the late Samuel Franklin, Esquire, stared down upon me from the farther end of the room above the mighty mantelpiece. He looked, I thought, like some pompous heavenly butler who denied to all the world, and to us in particular, the right of entry without presentation cards signed by his hand as proof that we belonged to his own exclusive set. The majority, to his deep grief, and in spite of all his prayers on their behalf, must burn and perish everlastingly.